Hey everyone, I'm Ross with Aquatic Oasis. We're going to be putting together a new podcast for you. It's going to hopefully be every week, most potentially on Wednesdays. As we build this, we'll know more in the future on how it's going to be organized. But we're kind of wanting to focus on reef-centric material. Occasionally we'll have like exotic reptile information and freshwater and that kind of stuff. But we're mostly going to be talking about reef tanks and coral and marine fish and best practices. We'll probably start out with a lot of like beginner information for new reefers, and that should evolve into some of the nuanced information for experts and people who've been keeping coral for a long time, and evolving it as you grow and evolve with your reef tanks. So it should be fun, and we're kind of excited to do it. So, but I've got Adrian with me, and we're gonna talk about a few things.
So I feel like the biggest thing. So this is as beginner. I would assume a beginner, intermediate. Not really intermediate.
Well, how long have you been in it?
I say less than a year, 6 months probably.
Intermediate. We'll call it
intermediate. But also depends. Like
beginner, intermediate.
how interested are you in it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well,
that's a good thought because people absorb information differently.
Yeah,
so you could be 6 months in and still be a beginner. You might be 6 months in and know more than the seasoned guy that's been doing it for 5 years. It's capacity of knowledge that you're gaining.
I feel like the biggest thing that when I first started was I had started off with a freshwater tank, and I think it was a 75-gallon freshwater tank. And I had cichlids in it, and I lived in Texas, so I always wanted a saltwater tank. And I was really nervous because I think I went to one store and they're like, dude, if your pH levels are too high, your whole tank's dead. And I was like, I don't know what pH levels is. I don't even want to know what pH level is, so I never got into it, but I always was interested in it. So when I finally bought a home, I was like, man, I want a saltwater tank, and I had to huge conversation with the wife of how to get a saltwater tank. Something is so simple.
So you're scared of the cichlids, but now you want a marine tank.
Yeah.
Cichlids are too hard. Let's do reef.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So I ended up selling my cichlids, but they were simple. Just freshwater. I think it was most intimidating just getting saltwater. Like, you don't really know anything into it. You don't know what a cycle is. You can't just get water, put salt in it, throw in a tank, and then put fish. Mm-hmm. So, my biggest thing is, having just, been able to get into it, get to the hobby pretty cheap. I didn't want to put too much money into it. I just knew that it cost a lot of money, So I just feel like it's very intimidating, but now that I'm in it, it's I don't know how come I'm still in it. Because it's man, this is so much work, so much time. But then sometimes I just sit there in my office and I have had a long day, and I'm just looking at my fish tank, and I'm like, oh, this is what
I was going to say just now, do you regret it?
No, it's hard. It's hard. There's some days where I'm like, oh, this was $400. That sucked.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, you know what? This pump could last me 5 years, 10 years. So I got to think about this long term. Do I want my tank for 2 years, or do I want my tank for 5 years? And that's how I feel you're investing into it, and you're not just blowing money for a month, right? This is going to technically last you 5 to 10 years. If you maintenance it, it'll be better,
Well, speaking beginner and expert level reefers, sometimes, and a lot of times, you're starting out with something and you don't want to make it expensive. You want to be able to do it on a budget and be successful. But sometimes as you get experience behind you and you see these pumps failing and how much, even the cheap pumps, let's say a circulation pump costs you $90. Yeah. Well, 3 of those is a nice circulation pump. And if you lost 4 of them in the span of 4 or 5 years, and you're right there. The only difference was your experience with those cheap pumps versus the nice pumps. And that could be game changing. And with your attention level with the reef and how much you love it, if it's a pain in the butt, that day that you decide you don't need that reef tank anymore, the nice pump may have saved that. Waste of energy.
Yeah. One thing I think about nicer stuff is that people will still pay for the nicer stuff. If you go buy a $60 pump from Amazon, you're not going to sell it for $10, $15 if you ever want to get out of the hobby. Or
if you're flipping the used equipment when you decide.
But I noticed that you can buy a $400 light, and you can probably still sell it back for $250, $300, and somebody will buy it.
50% or so.
Yeah, somebody will buy it. So, but you could get the hobby cheap, but you're saying, there's pros and cons, right? I started with the cheapest heater you can buy, and just the all-in-one, just everything into one tank. And it's super nice because I just put water in it. It doesn't do anything. It just does its own thing. But as I want a better biome, want a better bacteria building in there, you get most of the water gets really dirty, and I just had the regular stuff. But once I started adding a circulation pump, the water's clear more most of the time. I had more cleanup crew. Like everything in a saltwater or like a reef tank has a purpose, right? Like there's a purpose for the circulation pump. If you don't have a high enough one, then you're going to get a lot more debris in your water, not as clear, right? And then with your lighting, if you don't have enough high lighting, your coral's not going to grow as fast, not going to look as pretty. I mean, everything, that's what I like about it, is that everything has its own purpose in the tank. And as I spend more money, I'm like, this sucks, but I'm like, but I know that it's meant for a reason, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I go to Aquatic Oasis all the time, so I don't know, like,
I appreciate that.
So, like, I have one tank, I have two. I mean, one, my old tank and my new tank. And, I mean, having to put water in the sump, having to change the water, having to clean the algae, having to feed the fish, and remember to give them, like, food and make sure, like, you want to see if your coral thriving. Like, that, to me, feels like, I pretty much check it every single day. Probably 2 or 3 times a day I check my tank. But, like, you have, like, what, 40 tanks. So how do you water change all the tanks, even with employees, right? Feeding all your reptiles, feeding all the corals, and making sure that they're not dying, right?
Yeah.
Like how
and the expense behind it too. You know, you see all this, and you don't realize the expense. And you know, one of the biggest expenses is salt. That's one that you really have to grind your teeth on. Because salt, especially in today's world, isn't, you know, it's heavy. So even just to ship it in is not cheap.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, the history of how I guess I've figured this out and still figuring it out. I'm never going to be a perfect reefer. I'm just hoping that the ideas that come to me that inspire me to take a step forward are good. But like, I started out with everyone else. I used to breed exotic reptiles and had some family things happen. We had to be out of state for a long time and ended up selling that. And toward the ends of that experience, I ended up trading some animals, and that turned into a trade for coral and getting my first saltwater setup, which was a 40-gallon aquarium with a stand and some very basic coral and some rock, and had a really good guy that got me into it and helped me out. And, you know, I just kind of jumped in it just as everyone else did. Lots of questions at an annoying level, because you're like, I don't want to kill this thing, and it seems alien to me. I don't understand it at all, and it's intimidating. And so, you know, I have this tank, but I didn't fail. I don't know what I did right. Probably because I just, if you ever meet me as a person, I'm constantly talking. I'm constantly asking questions. And even when sometimes I know the answer, I just need confirmation of what I know. And I was successful with that little tank, which led me to want to upgrade. And I upgraded into a 72-gallon. It was a really cool bow front cornerback tank. And that was with a sump, my first real inline plumbed sump and everything. And again, I had really good success with keeping fish and keeping coral. And that 72-gallon, however, was when I first had some failures at the same time. I still call it a success because I came out of it happy. But you know, that's where I finally started to discover best practices. You know, what am I feeding? How often am I dosing? How much am I dosing? It was the first tank I experimented with carbon dosing with. You know, everyone wants to experiment with do-it-yourself type stuff with like vodka or different coral foods, making your own food, coming up with ways to try and be on a budget. And that really is what led me probably where I gained a vast amount of my knowledge was actually in that 72. It was just big enough to hold more coral and more fish and be a little easier than the 40, but it was small enough to make it a challenge still with parameters and keeping water stable. Eventually that grew into a 210-gallon aquarium, and that's where I really started to sell coral, because in there I started getting acropora the size of dinner plates, and you know, they're growing into each other, and I had to start fragging those, and you don't want to throw them away, especially when a frag of the coral that you just cut is worth $150 online, you know, and I would sell them for $75 just to try and make sure I wasn't wasting this. And when I was successful at selling these corals, then of course I evolved further and took that step forward, which was, okay, let's make a coral room in your basement and let's plumb your display down into that and have this huge system that's unified. And you're you know, that turned into my first, what I call a nursery, coral nursery, where I think my 200-gallon system turned into probably 700 gallons total volume. And, you know, nothing happened all at once. It was one thing led to the next, and every step had its challenges that I had to overcome and figure out. And sometimes, you know, it was like I had an pneumonia spike. What happened? Oh, this is what happened. I'm going to avoid that in the future, and I'm going to do this instead. Best practices. And, you know, eventually that turned into me wanting to open up a storefront after being successful. And so here we are. Now, because of these baby steps, the milk before the meat, now I've got, you know, thousands of gallons of water in the store and corals and fish, and we're having to do water changes and dosing and all of that and testing. And luckily, when you get to that size, you have employees that are helping you so you don't get emotionally, you know, put in a drought.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I'm imagining water changes every single day, you know, pretty much.
Yeah, luckily we don't do that. We've actually, because of these best practices, I've learned how to, especially when you have large volumes of water, how to lessen the need for water changes. So with the fish-only systems, there's ways of carbon dosing and things like that that keep your water, your nutrition levels in the water lower without having to rely on water changes. Of course, you still have to get water changes in there because that's what's going to get in all the trace minerals and everything and happy fish. But especially with coral, you know, once you learn how to dose and appropriately dose out carbonates and calcium, magnesium, and all the trace minerals like boron, strontium, manganese, these things, now you're not relying on water changes to introduce those minerals. So there's things that the beginner reefer's not going to know. They're going to rely more on water changes to keep their parameters good. And then the expert or the person who's failed more often and learned from those failures, what they're going to be doing that's different.
Right. So pretty much it's like my perspective is that you didn't just jump into like, oh, I'm going to make a fish store. Like you probably had, like you said,
I have failed
gallons.
More than the common reefer. Let's put it that way.
You already had a huge tank at home. You went through all the process of like making your own food, creating your own, like, I mean, you could say your own nursery.
Yeah. And
you're already selling coral, so it's not like you just jump into this, like, oh, I guess we're going to figure it out. So you kind of already were doing these duties or like kind of these chores.
Those steps were the ones that told me, hey, this will work.
Yeah.
It's worth the risk of doing this. And so far, it's been paying off. Pocatello's been kind. And Chubbuck.
Yeah, that's one thing is I was surprised, like, I mean, when I first came in, I mean, like, we're in, you know, the mall. The mall is like, it's not as busy as it used to be. There's not as much stores in here. And so,
a lot of people were really concerned, like, why'd you choose this location?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think the mall is a cool spot. I just don't think that there's enough, like, traffic. And for whatever reason, like, I thought people just got put off and there's not enough, like, engagement for them to come back in because whatever reason.
Something that's nice is the mall is waking up. There's a couple other local businesses too that have really done a lot of work in getting attention back to the mall. You know, I think it just struggled because you have Amazon, eBay, and Walmart's right there, and it's, you know, the need for a mall just kind of lessened a little bit. People didn't understand, and the recovery has occurred though. It's been doing better. It has its slow days, but it also has its really good days.
Yeah.
Not just our store, but the mall in general.
Yeah, in general. And that's just some days that come in like on a weekend, like it's pretty busy, you know. But the whole entire like story of like you usually coming like doing all your reefing stuff, it's like pretty crazy because that's like something that you weren't like, oh, one day I want to be.
I never thought I wanted to have a store. I really liked selling coral out of my house and online.
Yeah, I just think it's a crazy how everything has turned, you know.
Obviously, this has evolved my life. This is literally a lifestyle for me now, and as a lifestyle, that doesn't mean I'm perfect at it. Doesn't mean I'm the best. I'm always going to have questions, and I'm always going to be changing my opinions on best practices on keeping coral and stuff. But you're newer. You're still figuring out some of these. What are the best practices? So with us being here, previous, you know, it was very difficult to get good information and figure out what you were going to do and if you were even going to keep marine versus cichlids.
Right.
What does it mean to you that we're here?
I mean, honestly, the thing was that like knowing that you have a system to like, it's almost like, you know, you're at like, I don't know how to explain this, but you're asking your dad like, hey, like dad, like I need help fixing this sink or like the roof, right? It's like having like that like confirmation to let someone know like, yeah, you're doing the right thing, you're doing the wrong thing, or this is what I do as a personal experience. Because I mean, you can go online and look up things, but like the specific problem you have might not be everybody's specific problem, right? So like having a local fish store to me was like, I can get into this hobby and I feel comfortable because then I know that if something's wrong, I can just come to the fish store and be like, hey dude, what do I need to do? Because one of my biggest pet peeves is going to stores and then asking them for something in the store and they know nothing about. So if I go to Best Buy, I'm like, hey, I want to buy this TV. And they're like, yeah, it's nice. It's this newest model. Like, I want to know, like, a difference, right?
Why is it the best model?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, like, having, like, I guess local fish store versus, like, Petco, same thing. I go in there, yeah, we have a salt tank. It's over here. There's a couple of clownfish. When did you guys get them? I don't know. They've just been there, you know? Like, that doesn't help me because I don't feel confident in what I'm doing because they don't want to feel confident in their information. So, like, me having a local fish store, I was like, you know what, I can't afford an RDI system right now. I don't even know if I'm going to continue with the thing. I can buy my RDI water from them, right? What do I actually need right now and what do not need, right? Like, if I have a 30-gallon tank, do I need a protein skimmer? Technically, no, right?
Yeah.
And it depends on what you're putting in your tank. So, like, knowing this information by just going and asking, then you can go from there. And then you can learn on your own and then explore to what works and what doesn't work. But, like, just having the place to buy your, you know, bacteria, to buy, fish that you guys hear, you can go and see what works. I can come in here and be like, hey, I really like this fish. It's so sick. And you're like, this fish is not going to work in your tank. It's going to kill all your fish. And, like, I would have known that, right? I would have spent $200 on this sick fish, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it's so sick in my tank, and then all my fish are dead. Yeah. And I would have known these things. So, like, having a local fish store has probably been the biggest thing that I'm still in the hobby. If it wasn't for, like, having a store close by here, I probably wouldn't stay here because I don't know what to do if my tank fails. I don't know what to do if I have ick or velvet. I can go on YouTube, but, like, having somebody that's like, hey, this is what you need.
And then, you know, and sometimes when you're, not to interrupt, but like when you're doing ick or velvet or something like that, sometimes it's like, I need immediate action.
Right.
And, well, unfortunately, a lot of the larger box like pet stores, they don't sell copper, or they don't sell the copper brand that you want that goes with your test kit. Right. You know, Copper Power is probably the most trusted copper. But why, you know? Are they going to be able to explain to you chelated, non-chelated, test kits that are, you know, going to be compatible? You know, like one that comes up is we sell the Seachem, but that's technically for a different copper altogether. Yeah. Not that it's bad, it's just different copper. So sometimes you're not going to get true readings and things like that. So yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, having that specialized niche information.
Yeah, and like sitting for like even like just testing our water. Like, I don't know, if I didn't have the local fish store, I probably would never test water. Because, I would test my ammonia or whatever I can with the strips, but like you said, like the copper strips of Seachem, they sell them, but they stop at like 1.026. So if you're trying to get more copper than like at 1.03 or whatever, like
2.5.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. They wouldn't, it would just stop, so then you don't ever know. But like, just having the knowledge of the local fish store. Also, sometimes you get used gear. So then, like, if you're looking for stuff, they do it, and then all their fish is quarantined. So like Petco, you can buy fish and you put in your tank, and then you don't know if it has any parasites or anything like that. But like, you know, I know you guys, the tank you guys put him in, I see the fish moving. It's not like he's not eating. You guys feed him, and it's not like it's just there, right? So I feel like there's so much pros to it, and like I said, it's the reason why I can't stay in my hobby, and it's also like a community.
Yeah.
And you kind of get into the vibe of all that.
Community is the big one.
Yeah. You know,
not for the pet store, but that's actually how I got into this. This is often how I even had, going back to the what I was saying earlier, the Facebook groups and the different reefers being able to come together and sharing that information. That's where probably, the anecdotal wealth of knowledge is. And most of this hobby is anecdotal. Yeah. It really is. It's just, why did you fail? Okay, do something else. Oh, I was successful this time. That's good enough for me. I'm going to keep doing that. Not the one where, So, and we tried to take that community and share that information too. So, yeah, I see what you're saying.
One thing, because the community is, I've gotten some really good friends out of being in a saltwater tank that, like, I didn't have. Like, I'm not from here, so I don't have tons of people that I know from high school or college or whatever. So it's like being in a new place, and it's hard for me to go make friends because you go to people to work, and people you work with are just people you work with. You know, you're nice to them, you're cool, but like that's pretty much it. But like I've met some good friends from the community that they're like, they're actually friends. And I think it's the funniest thing is like I have a buddy who will come and talk, and like him and his wife will come and hang out with my wife. And the first thing we're there, I'm like, yeah, this is this GSP, and how's your leather coral doing? And yeah, we're all talking about like fish stuff, and my wife's like, they're all fish related, and my wife's just there like, you guys are weird. We're all like,
not understanding the passion.
We're talking like science to them,
right?
But it's like, it's nice like having friends that like are not just friends because they're like, hey, you know my wife, or like, you know this guy that I went to school with. Like, you're friends out of like interest in the same hobbies.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like makes things different because you can kind of relate to things, you know, and also life. So like, I mean, I don't know, it's just been like a huge, I think, fun thing for me. And I mean, the goal is to like make your tank your own piece of art, you know, and that's what I want. I like going to see my friends' tanks, and I'm like, man, that's cool. Like, I don't know how I can make that in my tank, but it looks good on your tank. And how do you get to here? And then they give us advice, and you know, like it's just, it's, I don't know, it's like a huge community, like you said.
You said something earlier about it being like a classic car.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like, one thing I was want to talk about was like how, like, you know, things are so expensive, right? Like, I mean, coral can get expensive. You can go from a $35 frag to a $500 frag, you know?
We can go into the thousands.
Yeah, thousands. So like, why is it worth it for people to get into this hobby, right? Like, I mean, I look at myself every day, I'm like, why the heck am I still doing water changes? Like, and when I'm like, you know, I'm already in like $1,000 in this tank. Like, how do I not go in more money? But it's like, at the end of the day, it's like a classic car. Like, you know, people see an old beaten like barn car, and they they spray out all the dirt, and then they clean up all the
time
rust
and money,
and somebody might see that it's just a piece of junk, right? It's just a tank. It's just a glass. It's just sand. It's just rocks, right?
It's novelty.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's just like a little knick-knack, right? But I see it as in like, I mean, life, right? Like, you see how life grows. Like, even I have a baby, and I see how she like goes from crawling to like walking, and these are like big moments for me. And like, just seeing it evolve, like just seeing the process of growing. I mean, that's why I fill my tank. Like, people come in, they see your tank, and they see like the anemones, and they see all the frog spawn, and they see your philia and your zoa garden, and they see the fish, like, oh, this nice fish. But in my life, like in my heads, I'm thinking like, this is like, you don't understand how long it took to make this, to make it to be, look at how pretty it is right now. And it's just like I said, it's like art. It's like you draw, oh, I want some sky, and then you add your rock, your aquascape. Oh, I want some grass, then you add your sand. You know, it's just everything. It's like seeing something from nothing built to something that everybody wants to be a part of it. And it's just like I said, it's just like a piece of art. And it's everybody's own spin on what they want it to look like.
Yeah, I totally relate with that. You made me think immediately of our show tank in the store, the 350 glass cages system that we're running. It, every frag started out that big, tiny little acropora and tiny, a zoa polyp or two of different kinds. And you look in there now, and it's still growing out. It's a big tank, so it takes a lot of growth to fill it.
Yeah.
But, I hear all the time, people like, oh, this looks so nice. I want that tank. How much for that tank? They want that instant gratification of this tank. They don't understand the heartaches we've had. That system has even with quarantining and copper and chloroquine phosphate and different things, we still ended up getting velvet in there. They killed everything outside of, we have a mascot fish in there named Presley. It's a big blonde meso tank with streamers, huge fish. He's beautiful, but he was the only one that survived, and it was because we were able to get him out and treat him with copper and stuff. And same with the coral. You'll have beautiful torches, and then one day they're just dead. You're checking parameters and everything's fine. You're like, "What's up?"
Why is it dead? Yeah.
But then they someone comes in, they see the day when everything just looks fantastic. You're like, "Oh, this looks so good," and that's gratifying. But yeah, that history of what it took to get it there is not present. But even with the pain comes the gratification and the joy, because you're like, man, I worked hard.
I went through 4 torches to get one.
To get this one that's working. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
And I think that's something that every reef keeper, and honestly, to a degree, every freshwater keeper is going to experience as well. Something that I feel that comes up in the store too is, what's the difference between freshwater and what's the difference between coral and marine? Like, freshwater is easy, saltwater is hard. Honestly, I used to breed discus, and I've kept, and that's a bad example because they're considered an expert level fish, but they're really not that much different from each other. Marine is going to have salt, especially, let's say you're doing just a fowler, just fish only live rock system, no corals, no anemones, nothing like that. You're just doing fish to start out with. It's really not much different than keeping freshwater fish. In some cases, sometimes the saltwater fish are hardier than the freshwater fish. You're going to have more expenses. That's the big difference. You got to buy salt. You're going to be worrying about RODI water or distilled water, however you're starting out. Live rock, all that kind of stuff. So it's more expensive, but really, if you're treating your animals with respect, and not that people intentionally do not do that, but setting up a freshwater tank and waiting a day and then putting your fish in, it's not very respectful to those animals that have to go through that ammonia cycle. That same cycle occurs in marine. And so if you're really going to do an aquarium right, freshwater as well, you need to set it up understanding what the nitrogen cycle is and getting the ammonia and having it finish its course out before you start putting animals in there. And really, I think that's the difference that scares most people starting in is like, oh, I have to go 2 months without putting fish in. I'm going to do salt. I'm going to do freshwater instead.
I don't wait. Yeah.
I was like, well, I mean, the process is the same. How about you wait 2 months before you put your freshwater fish in? But you're thinking $5 fish, $50 fish. Right. And so if that $5 fish dies, let's go get another one, and or I get a free replacement on that fish and just go get another one. You know, you go through 2 or 3 goldfish, and then the third one lives because at that point the cycle has done its job. And you're like, oh, well, that was just a good goldfish. Or I bought this goldfish at this other pet store. That pet store must be a better pet store. When really the whole time it was just your tank was maturing. And unfortunately, freshwater, just because I think it is easier entry price-wise, people treat it more novelty. They treat it with a little bit less respect is the word that comes to mind, but there's another word.
Taking
hesitancy to do it correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel
really
like
they're the same, honestly.
Yeah, I feel like it's just like you're exactly how I think you hit it around the head was, $5 fish, it dies, I can put it in my tank, whatever, I go buy another $5 fish. Yeah. But that was one of the biggest things is like the minimum fish you're gonna buy in a saltwater tank is $30, which is an Ocellaris, right? The smallest one. Yeah. But like that's your cheapest fish, and then you start buying snails and everything gets more expensive. So like you're like, I'm gonna put $60 a pair of clowns. You gotta make sure that everything's right, and then you gotta spend the $40 on the sand and then the salt water, and then you want it just like people want something that sits on their desk and they want it to be there, but they want to not worry about it, right? Yep. But then that's like it defeats the purpose of like having an animal, right? Like I have a dog, but like if I just say, hey, it's a cool dog, let's just put it in the cage, it beats the whole purpose of having a dog. Yeah. So like, I think now that I've done a freshwater tank and I've had a saltwater tank, I feel like my freshwater tank, my water evaporated a lot more faster, and that was probably because I lived in Texas. Mm-hmm. It was fast. Heat. It was way faster.
If you're running AC will actually sometimes pull water out of your tank. Same with the furnace in the winter.
It was going so fast, but they were cool because you could buy. I mean, the cheapest fish I probably spent was $20, and they would get about this big.
Oh, because you were doing cichlids.
Yeah, right? Cichlids. So they were getting pretty big, and they had different looks or whatever. But they're just pretty simple, I guess. Like, they're not as different. But, like, with the saltwater fish, like, seeing them, like, it's a lot more work. But, like, once you kind of, like, get into the hobby and know, like, hey, once my levels are here, and if your tank's sustainable, it usually stays sustainable unless you start adding something that you're not used to adding. Mm-hmm. Whether it's you're dosing more, putting more food, or you're dosing something over more than you think you should, Yeah. It won't change unless something dies or whatever.
That's a good point too. Like the fish, really where saltwater I feel gets its reputation for being more difficult in modern time is reef systems. Reef systems are more difficult than a freshwater system, even more difficult than a planted freshwater system. Right. And that's just because you're paying attention to levels in the water, like you're saying, you're testing and all that, where fish, in my opinion, and I'm probably not perfectly leveled on the scale of difficulty between freshwater fish and saltwater fish, but I'd say they're fairly even in difficulty. Saltwater, the main thing in my opinion makes those fish more difficult is learning how to quarantine.
So what do you think is like the best average from like 40 gallons, 75 gallon? Like what do you think is a good beginner tank?
That's a good question. There's different things you have to weigh out here. One is the budget. How much are you willing to spend right off the cuff? Now, that's usually a difficult question for people to answer because they aren't yet passionately invested in something. It's more of I want this, I'm very interested in it, it's going to be cool. But I don't think it's worth $500 right off the cuff. Now, someone that's been into reefing and has a tank, all of a sudden they are now emotionally passionate about their tank and they're willing to spend $500, and it means it's a different ballgame, Right. But usually what I'm recommending to a lot of people, I'll tell you, honestly, most people are somewhere around $200 is what they're expecting to pay. Which, if you're really going to jump into something that's going to be easy and, going to work out, long term, you're going to need to spend more than $200, right? And not to say that it can't be done, it's just on the average buyer. But so usually I'm recommending like a 30-gallon, and I'm telling them live rock, sand, you're going to put crabs and shrimp, you're going to throw a pair of clownfish in there with an anemone.
That's pretty simple.
Very simple. You're probably in, like that's probably $200-$300 to do something like that. If they're not purchasing it all at once, if they're purchasing the tank, rock, and sand, and pumps and heaters, and they're just getting a system going, you could do it for that. It's going to be a very budget friendly.
Yeah, it's not going to be the nicest like heater or whatever.
It's going to be kind of generic, cheaper equipment, which is fine because honestly, I already know because I've gone through this. I'm expecting them to get passionate about it, and it's going to get this little tingle going that they need to upgrade.
Yeah.
They're going to want different fish. They're going to want more coral. They're going to want a better looking system. And it happens to all of us. It's almost a joke in the reefing community. It was like I've got a 300-gallon now. When am I going 500? Even when you're in a massive tank, you still want to go bigger. It's always bigger is better in reefing. And so that's how it is with that initial purchase. So people that are jumping in, really a smaller tank is fine. You just have to set expectations. So it's like, okay, you're not going to have a reef in this tank. Yeah. And if you are, that's where you're going to be a more seasoned reefer that knows how to keep that tank stable and keep those coral happy if you're going to do a 30-gallon or smaller, But 30 is probably the smallest that I recommend for people to try, like the BioCubes. Mm-hmm. Lots of people have successful BioCubes as a starter tank. That's actually a really good, especially the ones now with the new LED lighting. It's still not the greatest lighting, but it'll keep zoas and things alive. And I've actually seen people keep Euphilia in there without upgrading lighting. So awesome. Those are not a $200 tank though.
Yeah, they're about $400.
Yeah, I think they're like $400 for the tank now.
Yeah, but then again, you have the lights, lid.
And most of it's covered.
Yeah, and so so there's pros to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can go to Petco and get like a the $20. Sometimes they do like a $20 gallon for $1 a gallon, but you need.
But you have to piece everything into there, and you're buying it individual.
It sucks.
Yeah, it gets expensive.
I think of one thing that I could recommend to somebody, or not, I don't know, I think a mixture. Is there's people that do get the hobby, or people that are like getting in, like hey, I have too much of this, like. If I could go back and if I was buying a used tank, I would buy a tank that was already set, because the hardest thing is like, if you buy a used tank, then you have to buy the salt, the sand, the rocks, and then wait for it to cycle. But you have people who will be like, hey, I'll sell you my whole entire tank with all my corals and all my fish for $800 cash. Mm-hmm. And once you start like putting stuff like piece by piece. You end up spending more than $800 and you don't even have half of it, and then your tank's not even growing. Their stuff's already been growing, and they have pieces you could probably frag and give to your friends. Like that's one thing I wish I can do, but I'm kind of like, I'm glad we're at this spot that I am right now because I'm like learning more, right? Yeah. If I did that, I probably would be like, hey, I have everything, Mm-hmm. But I like the point of like learning and like, okay, this is what's growing. Why is my GSP growing? Why does this guy have the smaller tank than me? And he has just one flow, and everything's growing like crazy, And most people that I asked about growing stuff, like, dude, how is your stuff growing so fast? A lot of people dose. I mean, they AB plus like some other thing. I think it's from like, what's the company that does microbacter?
Brightwell.
Brightwell. They do like it's almost like a healing kind of thing for
Restore.
Coral. Yeah.
I like Restore. It's an amino acid.
Yeah, like they mix AB plus and Restore a little bit together, and then they feed the corals like every other 2 weeks. Yeah. And they're like, it does good. And like that's most everybody, like no one I've ever asked be like, I do absolutely nothing. Mostly they do like very little.
And that's something that you're going to start paying attention to when you start to leave the beginner phase and you start looking at nutrition and the roles. Because at the startup, nutrition's bad. You don't want nitrates. You don't want phosphates. Mm-hmm. You're trying to keep your tank from growing algae and all these things because your beneficial bacteria that's growing in the tank, your biofilter, they're the ones that over time will usually control that. But in a new tank, you're cycled. But is it mature? Mature is something that's hard to understand. Are your bacteria doing everything that they're supposed to, and is there enough of them? And once you get into a more mature tank, your corals are going to start to get hungry when your bacteria mature and they start to deplete nitrogen and start to deplete foods that are naturally occurring in the water for your coral. Well, now you got to start worrying about nutrition. You're going to start feeding corals. You're going to start and being less worried about maybe the water quality, because now your tank is taking care of itself a little better than it was at the start. That's where amino acids come in, and AB Plus is great. People don't understand that it's not just amino, it's got carbohydrates and sugars, and it's basically a kind of a basic liquid coral food. That's why you got to refrigerate it. Refrigerate your AB Plus. That's one that I hear a lot in the store. People are like, it smells terrible. What's going on? Did you open it, and did you put it on the counter? And how long has it been sitting on that counter? Refrigerate it, because those carbohydrates, they're not shelf stable once they're open.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, now you're aware. But anyway, yeah, so that's something you're going to grow into, and that's one of the things that doesn't make it more difficult. Up front, when I start talking to you about nutrition and feeding and levels of nitrate and phosphate, and that's going to be over your head, and that's going to make it seem difficult, right? But as you grow as a reefer, that's the information that's going to make you successful long term with coral. And it's milk before the meat. And so I think having a longer form dialogue like this is going to be beneficial, not just for me to get out my ideas, but also for people that are viewing, that are like either already keeping a reef tank and want to be more successful, but also people that are maybe on the cuff of, hey, do I do freshwater? Do I do marine? Do I do an aquarium? I'm interested in doing something. Here's a little bit of information to maybe inspire you and set expectations at the same time. So appreciate you guys viewing. I did want to let you know we're going to do a free giveaway of a coral of my choice. And that's going to be to whoever finishes, obviously, the end of this video, which is where you're finding out about it. But it will be a coral of my choice, and I'm going to let Adrian pick the winner. The way that you're going to be chosen is by commenting something that you liked about the podcast, or what you'd like to see in the future. If there's a topic that you find intriguing that you want to know more about and you want to hear what we think of it, leave a comment letting us know, and or posting a picture of your tank, your favorite coral, your favorite fish, something about your reef. If you want to post a picture of it, again, Adrian's going to pick his favorite of these, and it will be our winner, and you'll get a free coral of my choice. So it's going to be a surprise when you come in. Just come into the store, and we'll get you bagged up, and that'll be fun. So really appreciate you guys and the support you give into Aquatic Oasis here at the Pine Ridge Mall. We hope to see you in the store, and I'd love to get some feedback on this podcast. So thank you very much, and happy reefing from Aquatic Oasis.